All right, folks, so last time we met, we were talking about the Panic of 1819 and how this was an era of good feelings or bad feelings. We're going to go ahead and end Unit 3 today talking about Chief Justice John Marshall's Supreme Court, and we're going to talk about some international policies. So let's talk about Chief Justice John Marshall first. Chief Justice John Marshall is the leader of what? He's Chief Justice, so what is he in charge of? The Supreme Court. Again, he's a Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, so we should definitely remember that. He's Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. And he's a Federalist, so remember that. He is a Federalist. Even if the Federalist Party dies out, will he still be in power? Yes, because how long does he serve? For life. Now, the two things that Chief Justice John Marshall stands for is he believes in making the federal government more powerful than the states. So you're going to see him in these decisions doing that. And he believes in putting the private interest over the public interest. So like putting businesses over the interests of the people. So again, the two types of decisions that John Marshall will have are the federal government is better than the states or more powerful than the states, and the private interest is more important than the public interest. Okay, so here are the Supreme Court cases you need to know under John Marshall. First, McCulloch v. Maryland. In the Supreme Court case of McCulloch v. Maryland, the Supreme Court ruled in the decision that the Second Bank of the U.S. was what? They ruled that the bank was constitutional. So despite several attempts by the Jeffersonians and others who believed that this bank was unconstitutional, finally, with McCulloch v. Maryland, the Supreme Court ruled pretty clearly that the bank was, in fact, constitutional. And should that have been the end of this debate? Because the Supreme Court has the final say in determining the constitutionality of law. And what power is that where they have that final say? What is that power called? Judicial review. So they have that power of judicial review. So again, you should know that McCulloch v. Maryland ruled that the bank was constitutional. The other thing you should know about McCulloch v. Maryland is it said that state law may not conflict with federal law. State law may not conflict with federal law, is what McCulloch v. Maryland said. So pretty much, folks, which laws are higher, federal law or state law? Federal law. So if the federal government said everyone must wear the color blue, can the state say no, everyone must wear the color red? No, they cannot, because that conflicts with federal law. So that's McCulloch v. Maryland. Good so far? Okay. The next Supreme Court case is Cohens v. Virginia. In Cohens v. Virginia, the decision said that the Supreme Court may review state court cases, suggesting who is more powerful, the states or the Supreme Court. Supreme Court. Let me explain the background of this case. So Cohens was selling illegal lottery tickets. And so the state of Virginia found him guilty. And so he sued all the way up to the Supreme Court. And when the Supreme Court received the case, they heard it and they said, yeah, you're guilty, Cohens. Sorry, Virginia was right. You're going to jail. Now, the Supreme Court agreed with Virginia. But that's not the important part. The important part is that the Supreme Court believed that they could review Virginia's case. Because, folks, what else could have the Supreme Court done? repealed it, said, nope, I'm sorry, we would have overturned your decision and said you were wrong. So even if they agreed, that's not the important part. The important part is that they could review the case. Does that make sense, folks? Let me put it a different way. Let's say you want to buy a car. So let's say you like that blue car over there. Okay, it's a blue Honda, let's say. You want to buy that blue Honda. Now, you can't buy that car unless you ask your parents. So you ask your parents and you say, hey, can I buy that car? And they said, yeah, sure. And they agreed with you. But is the fact that they agreed the important part? The important part is what? You had to ask their permission first. Does that make sense, folks? Because what else could have they said? No, not that car. So the important part about Cohens v. Virginia is it made it explicitly clear that the Supreme Court may review state court cases. Cool? Next one. Gibbons v. Ogden. Here's another important Supreme Court case. In Gibbons v. Ogden, the Supreme Court ruled that states may not regulate interstate commerce. States may not regulate interstate commerce. So, what is interstate commerce, folks? What is commerce first? Trade. Trade is commerce. Commerce is trade. So what is interstate commerce? Trade between the states. So states may not regulate interstate commerce. The word or phrase interstate commerce means trade between the states. Interstate just means between states. Okay? So they may not regulate interstate commerce. So what this means, folks, is this. Who can name a business that does work across all states? FedEx. Let's say FedEx. FedEx, does they operate across all states? So is that interstate commerce? Sure. So can California tell FedEx, hey, FedEx, if you're going to be working in California, all your trucks have to be blue? Can they do that? No, because do FedEx trucks also have to go to other states? And what if Nevada said, hey, FedEx, all your trucks have to be red? Is that going to be a problem for FedEx? Because they're operating across state lines. So what they ruled was that states may not regulate interstate commerce, only the federal government can. So states may not regulate interstate commerce, only the federal government can. So states may not regulate interstate commerce, only the federal government can. So there's interstate commerce, and then there's intrastate commerce. And by the way, you need to understand interstate commerce because it comes up a lot in U.S. history. So interstate commerce, folks, is again trade between states. Okay, and this is regulated by who? Who can regulate interstate commerce? The federal government. Intrastate commerce is trade within the state. And who can regulate trade within your state? Individual states. So I'll give you an example. Here's another one. McDonald's. McDonald's operates only in California? No. It operates across multiple states. So can California say, hey, McDonald's, all your burgers have to have avocados in it because we're California and we have avocados? Can California tell McDonald's that? Why not? Because that's interstate. Wouldn't McDonald's then have to put avocados in their burgers in Texas and Nevada and Washington and Oregon? So can California do that? Do they have that power? No. But what about Doubles? Is Doubles an interstate business? Do they have Doubles franchises all across the United States? No, that's only within the U.S. So could California hypothetically say, hey, Doubles, you have to have avocados in all your burgers? Can they do that? Because it's within the state. Does that make sense to everyone, folks? So again, the idea of interstate is across state lines. Only the federal government can regulate that. Whereas within states, that's intrastate. Only states can regulate that. Make sense to everyone? Okay, make sure you understand it because we're going to have to get into this topic again in the next unit. The other Supreme Court case you have to know is Fletcher v. Peck. So Fletcher v. Peck is the last Supreme Court case that you guys have to know, at least for this unit. Now, in the Supreme Court case of Fletcher v. Peck, the Supreme Court ruled that states may not break contracts. It ruled that states may not break contracts, even if it was bad for the public. So states may not break contracts, even if it was bad for the public. Alexis, can you... Thank you. So, Fletcher v. Peck ruled that states may not break contracts even if it was bad for the public. So let me give you an example. Suppose I was principal of La Puente High School, okay, and I had the authority to sell the land or use the land however I wanted. Okay, I was given that power by the state of California. You know, every principal can use the land however they want. So I say, fine, I'm going to go ahead and sell the land, sell the baseball field. I'm going to sell that land to the nuclear waste company, and I'm going to bury really dangerous nuclear waste in the baseball fields. Okay? And they're going to pay me $3 million to do that. Because they're going to use the land, and I'm not going to be affected by it. I'm going to leave with that $3 million, but who's going to be stuck with it? You guys. And you guys can grow like mutant arms and legs and whatever else, and you're probably going to die from cancer because of the radiation from the nuclear waste. Well, is that a bad contract that I signed with that nuclear waste company? Sure. So the state of California says, hey, that's a bad contract. We're going to break that because that's bad for the kids in La Puente. And the Supreme Court says, nope, you can't do that. You can't break contracts. Only the federal government can. Because the idea is that they wanted to put private interest over public interest. Because the idea is that they wanted to be pro-business. So they wanted to make sure that it was really difficult to break contracts. Because what if, folks, you signed contracts and the state could just decide whenever it wanted to break that contract? Would that be bad for business? Yeah, I signed 900 contracts and the state went ahead and said, no, you can't do these 30 contracts. Is that going to be good for my business? No. So they said states may not break contracts, only the federal government can. So the idea is we're going to go ahead and put the state interest, or rather the private interest, over the public interest. We want to make sure that private businesses are more important than public interests. And that's Fletcher v. Peck. Questions there? None? Okay, cool. So let's go ahead and move on to international issues during Monroe's presidency. Henry, if I have you move that folder, what am I going to find? Slide that folder to the right or left? Nothing? Okay. So, international issues during Monroe's presidency. So, what we're going to be discussing here is what Monroe did as President of the United States. So, what's going to happen here is this. Everyone good? Everybody move forward? International issues during Monroe's presidency. So here's what he did. The first act passed by Monroe is the Rush-Bagot Treaty of 1817. So the Rush-Bagot Treaty of 1817 did the following. It was the naval disarmament of the Great Lakes. It was the naval disarmament of the Great Lakes. You guys know the Great Lakes, right? They're these lakes right here. They're kind of great. And this was a treaty between the U.S. and Great Britain. And the idea is that what will we no longer have in the Great Lakes? What were we going to remove from the Great Lakes?
Water.
Huh? Battleships. We're going to remove warships. The naval disarmament of the Great Lakes meant that we were going to remove our navies. Because the hope was, what were we trying to create between the U.S. and America? Peace, an alliance of sorts. Because if we continue to have our navies in the Great Lakes, what was eventually going to happen again? Another war. So we said, let's remove our navies from the Great Lakes and let's just share this territory between us. Does that make sense to everyone, folks? So first off, this was one step to further peace. It was the naval disarmament of the Great Lakes. So to disarm means to reduce your weaponry. And specifically here, it was a naval disarmament. We're reducing our navies or eliminating our navies in the Great Lakes. It's one step closer to like peace, one step closer to alliance. Next act that followed was the Treaty of 1818. And in the Treaty of 1818, it did two things. Number one, it established the Canadian-American border at the 49th parallel. So you know how America and the Canadian border is like this super smooth line all the way across? That's not because there's a river all the way across America and Canada. That's the 49th parallel. They established the Canadian-American border at the 49th parallel. So they established the Canadian-American border at the 49th parallel. And by parallel, you know what I mean, like those longitudinal, latitudinal lines across the world, right? So the 49th parallel. They also said that they would jointly occupy the Oregon country. So America and Great Britain would also jointly occupy the Oregon country. So they were going to share all the resources of the Oregon country. They were going to jointly occupy the Oregon country. So they were going to share the resources of the Oregon country. So again, Treaty of 1818, 49th parallel, and they are going to jointly occupy the Oregon country. Cool? Okay. The other treaty you have to know that's signed by Monroe is the Adams-Onis Treaty of 1819. And the Adams-Onis Treaty is also known as the Florida Purchase Treaty. Because what territory did they purchase? Florida. Yeah. Because it's called the Florida Purchase Treaty. So, the Adams-Onis Treaty, also known as the Florida Purchase Treaty, is when we bought Florida from a country. Who do we buy it from? Spain. We bought it from Spain. So we felt really good about that. So the Florida Purchase Treaty is when we bought Florida from Spain. Fun story, folks. One of the reasons why Spain felt compelled to sell it is our good friend Andrew Jackson here. What he ended up doing was that his job was supposed to chase down Native Americans who were attacking America. So he decided to chase the Native Americans all the way into Florida. Now, are we allowed to do that? Is that our territory? No, so he went into Spanish territory and defeated the Seminole Native Americans. And he said, well, while I'm here, I might as well take over the rest of Florida. So he also defeated the Spanish forts in Florida. And then he went ahead and told Congress, hey, Congress, so I took over Florida. And they're like, what? You weren't supposed to take over Florida? And so they had to contact Spain and say, hey, Spain, one of our guys took over Florida. So is it okay if we buy it? Because we're kind of already here. And so Andrew Jackson made himself governor of Florida, and we were forced to buy it because we had no choice. We had already taken it over. So those are the things that Andrew Jackson does. The last one you should be familiar with is the Monroe Doctrine of 1823.
Huh?
I don't remember how much we bought it for. But the Monroe Doctrine of 1823. So here's some background with the Monroe Doctrine. In Latin America, folks, we have tons of revolutions happening in Latin America at this time. And who inspired all these Latin American revolutions? We did. As America, we said, hey, we're breaking away from Europe. You should probably break away from Europe too. They're like, yeah, let's all do that. So there's all these revolutions occurring in Europe. And did we inspire that? Yeah. Yes. Now, our concern is that once these colonists have driven off, control from the Europeans, we're afraid that what might the Europeans try to do? Reconquer, right? Try to take that territory back. And so we passed the Monroe Doctrine that said that Europe may not colonize or intervene in Latin America. So we pretty much told Europe they may not colonize or intervene in Latin America. Or another way to put it, they may not colonize or intervene in the Western Hemisphere. Europe may not colonize or intervene in Latin America, or they may not intervene or colonize in the Western Hemisphere. What that ends up looking like is this, saying, hey, Europe, you stay on your side of the world, and you stay out of the Western Hemisphere in Latin America. Now, how does Europe feel about America telling them what they can and can't do? Are they okay with that? Yeah. They're like, America, you've only been around for 50 years. Who are you to tell us what we can and can't do? You can't just bully us around. Does America have a powerful navy at this time? No, they do not. So America doesn't even have the ability to enforce this. But you know who will enforce it? England. England's pretty much saying, hey, yeah, Europe, you guys cannot colonize or intervene in the Western Hemisphere, and England is going to enforce it. And who has the most powerful navy in the world at the time? England does. And so, is England going to be able to prevent the Europeans from colonizing the Western Hemisphere? Sure. Now, England, they can benefit from this because England, they're still in the Western Hemisphere. They still control Canada. And do they want Spain and France and the Dutch to be able to still be in the Americas? No. So America's like, yeah, you can't come over. But who's the guy who's actually enforcing it? England is. So it was America's doctrine enforced by the British. That's like you getting bullied by this one kid, and so one day you see him at the grocery store, but with your dad who happens to be a wrestler. So then you're like, hey, what now? You want to say that to my face? And you're hiding behind your dad the entire time? Like, come on. You're always messing with me. You can't come in here anymore, all right? Get out. And the kid's not going to do anything because your father's standing right there. But that's kind of what America did. America's like, yeah, stay out or England's going to mess you up. Because America could rely on England to enforce the Monroe Doctrine. But the reason why America wanted this, folks, is if Europe is able to recolonize in America, why might that be a problem for the U.S.? What might Europe be able to do if they had colonies in America again? They might invade. They might be able to attack us. So we said, oh, no more. And the other reason why is that if there's no European countries in the Western Hemisphere, who's the most powerful country in the Western Hemisphere? America is. So we want this to be our backyard. We want this to be our sphere of influence. So, folks, that's Unit 3.